I'm coming in hot before we dive into today's episode because I have a special announcement, something I've been dreaming of creating for the past 7 years. You know how it feels to learn all of this amazing personal growth stuff, but then somehow end up feeling worse because you're not actually doing it? Like your knowledge is actually making you feel guilty instead of empowered. I get it. That's exactly why I created Living Mind Love. Each month, we'll explore one focus area through the lens of neuroscience and spirituality. But here's the magic part. Instead of overwhelming you with changes, we'll break everything down into tiny micro shifts that your brain actually welcomes, so you'll understand the science behind why it works, connect with the spiritual wisdom, and most importantly, actually apply it to your life. The value in this program is worth at least 50 times what I'm going to be giving it to you for, because it is my mission to help as many people as possible transform their lives. You'll also get access to the first ever Mind Love community on School. So if you're ready to stop collecting wisdom and start actually living it, go to mindlove.com/waitlist to join the waitlist, and you'll get instant access to my 10-year vision meditation. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 202. Today's episode is all about overcoming resistance to change and new ideas.
This is really focused on how does change happen and whether that's corporate change or ideas. Like, we don't need more evidence. We don't need more emotional against. So if you're trying to figure out why am I not operating the way I want, just be careful about thinking just in terms of fuel. Like, I need to motivate myself. I need to reconnect with the why I'm doing it. And I need an emotional pep talk. If there isn't a why, if you don't feel compelled, then the idea is inert, right? It's not going to go anywhere. But my guess is for many of these kinds of really important changes, what is really at the heart of things is that there is something standing in the way.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that little button. Subscribing, sharing, and 5-star reviews are really a great way to give back if you love the show. They help the show climb the charts, which helps me get even better guests. Today, I would love to share a review from Mad Monkey, who says, "This is my favorite podcast. Thank you, Melissa, for making a podcast so inspiring. Your vulnerability and the amazing guests you bring on are everything. Every time I listen, I feel stronger and less alone." Well, thank you so much for leaving this review. Just reading it made me feel less alone too, so just sending you so much love. Also, if you do leave me a review, whether you do it through Apple Podcasts or just want to send it to me in an email, I am revamping some parts of my website and I'm adding testimonials to that as well. So if you send a cute little picture of yourself, I just might add you to mindlove.com. But now let's get to it. I don't know about you, but I think the world needs some new ideas. There is a whole lot that's not working. I mean, it might be working for a select few people at the top of the food chain, so to speak, but collectively, we have access to more resources than we've ever had, but we're also less happy, more stressed, and fatter than we've ever been. So something, or some things, are just not working. The problem is, we might be sad, fat, and stressed out, but we think that we're comfortable. The funny thing about the comfort zone is that it's really just familiarity that creates the illusion of comfort. We can be sitting there in our comfort bubble, completely uncomfortable in our bodies and minds. But hey, we're used to it, so we stay in it. And when someone comes around with a new idea, we tense up and resist it because we just don't want to pop our own comfort bubbles. That's super discouraging for everyone involved. It's discouraging to the person in the comfort bubble because they lose hope that they can get out of it. And then it's especially discouraging for those who have big ideas that might actually make our lives better because they, or we, because I'm one of those people with some big ideas, we know it's going to be a hard sell. Those of us with big ideas have had conversations with the bubble people and shared ideas that were shot down immediately. Or we've tried to give suggestions or spark inspiration, and people are almost offended by it. Or we vote or sign petitions or protest, and so often nothing changes. So is there any hope for big changes that actually make a difference in people's lives, or even the world? How do we introduce something new into the world if most new ideas are just met with resistance? Our instinct tells us that all we have to do is make the idea itself really appealing. Then, obviously, people will bite, right? Like that old saying goes, if you build it, they will come. Well, as someone who worked in the mobile app world for years, I can tell you that that is absolutely not true. Did you know that only 0.01% of apps become financially successful? I also know plenty of people who have created courses that didn't sell, or wrote books that weren't read, or built products that hardly left the warehouse. But still, marketers, innovators, activists, and really anyone in the business of creating change just keep trying to just add a little more value, hoping people will finally say yes to what they're offering. I saw this happen too many times with app companies that I worked with. So they'd keep adding more features or benefits, or entrepreneurs will add more modules to their course, or more coaching calls, just more. But somehow, it doesn't lead to more people saying yes to what they're offering. As counterintuitive as it sounds, it usually has the opposite effect. So how do we break through resistance if we have a new idea? And how do we get people to say yes to our best ideas? Ideas that are fresh and new and awesome, but just not yet familiar. Well, that's what we're talking about today, because I know there are a whole lot of you out there that have such a potential to make big changes in the world. So our guest is Loran Nordgren. His research and his teaching all explores the psychological forces that propel and prevent the adoption of new ideas. He has received quite a few awards for research and teaching, and has worked with companies throughout the world on behavior change problems, a process that he calls behavioral design. So 3 key things we will learn are why your best ideas often get rejected, how to disarm the forces of resistance that act against change, and how to transform the very frictions that hold us back into catalysts for change. But before we get started, I want to invite you to wake up to the morning mind love. Every weekday morning, you get a little inspiration to set your tone for the day and give you something positive to focus on, like a short note from your highest self. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of self-reflective journaling prompts to help you grow. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. And now let's welcome Loran Nordgren to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So what piqued your interest about finding ways to get people to accept new ideas?
Oh, great question. I've for a long time been interested in the process of creativity. Honestly, the origin of this starts in a different place, which is how our new ideas formed. And a lot of my research, a lot of my thinking is really centered on that. And if you are interested in creativity, you have, I think, a natural affinity for innovation, because innovation is really the process of seeing creative ideas come to life. So I see innovation, the implementation of new creative ideas, as really a natural partnership in thinking about creativity.
Well, one of the things that you say is that people have the wrong intuitions about how to sell new ideas and create change. Why do you say that? What are people's intuitions and why are they wrong?
Yeah, so this brings us to the heart of things. The deep assumption that people operate on is that the way you get people to buy into really anything, to you, to a new idea, to a new product, to a new change initiative, whatever change you're trying to bring into the world, the assumption that we make is that the way you do that is to elevate appeal. I would call this operating the law of attraction. My belief is if I elevate the appeal high enough, eventually people will say yes. So you might think, if you look at like what people will do in dating, it's similar. Like maybe you're single and you want to find more dates. Well, how do I do that? Well, maybe I go to the gym more, maybe I get a better haircut, maybe I wear cooler clothes. Like the thing you are operating on is this idea that if I elevate appeal, eventually people will say yes. So we call all of these strategies designed to elevate appeal, we call it fuel. These are fuel-based strategies, and we have this habit of thinking in fuel. And the problem is that fuel is important, fuel is necessary, appeal is essential, but it's really only half of the process. So anytime we're launching a new idea into the world, yes, it needs to have fuel, it needs to have appeal. But anytime something new takes flight, there are these forces that operate against innovation and change. And we are so fixated on elevating appeal that we often don't see these things. And we refer to these forces as frictions. And in essence, not thinking about friction when you are trying to create change, when you are trying to bring new ideas to life, as a metaphor, would be like designing an airplane and thinking only about the engines and not thinking at all about the aerodynamics.
That's a really good point. One of the things I can almost hear listeners asking is this just teaching people how to sell us things even better? We have enough of that in the world. What are the benefits of learning how to introduce a new idea and overcoming this friction? Is it going to be one of those things that only benefits some people, or does it have the potential to be a benefit to the world as a whole?
This is for really anyone who is trying to understand how do we bring the change that we want to see to life. And I suspect many of the people listening are people who are working quite passionately to try and create change, whether that's environmental change, whether that is social change, whether that is more equitable society, whatever the change may be. We need to understand the process of implementation. My argument is that we really only think about one side of the problem. And you can see this in response to the pandemic. You can see it in response to environmentalism. I assure you that, yes, there may be some people who don't believe in something like climate change, but there are many, many people who do. But if you actually look at their actions, there is a huge gap between their intention and their actual action. And what explains that? So the thing we've seen again and again and again is so many good ideas are self-evidently good ideas. We don't need more evidence. We don't need more emotional appeal. We don't need any of those things. What we really need is to understand what are these forces that are holding people back from making the change that is so self-evidently good.
That's such a good point. I recognize so many things that I feel like need to be changed. And I think it becomes even more evident when there's a new generation because they have fresh eyes on how to look at certain things. And I'm not saying everything the new generation proposes that I'm on board with, but I remember looking at certain things when I was younger and just feeling like, well, I feel like the solution's obvious. And then the older I get, the more I lose hope because I do see how hard it is to get people to step out of their comfort zone or to adopt a big change. It's like we're only able to do these small little micro changes, and even that's met with resistance. So I'm curious, what are the main frictions against innovation and change?
We think about 4 frictions, and I think a really helpful way to think about this is to look at the structure of an idea or the anatomy of an idea. Any new idea, again, this could be social change. This could be maybe you see a better way to streamline process in the hospital you work at, whatever it may be. Any new idea has 4 basic elements, and each element has a corresponding friction. So the first element that is a part of any idea is what is the degree of change being proposed? Are we talking about a slight tweak, or are we talking about radical change? And the answer to that question determines the degree of the first friction, which we call inertia. In other words, the human mind favors the familiar over the unfamiliar. So the more radical the change, the more resistance there is to that change. The first time I learned I would be teaching virtually, having taught in person for 13 years, that's radical change. I'd never done it before. It was unfamiliar. And precisely because it was all of those things, it meant there was resistance against it. So one has to do with the size of the change. Then all change needs to be implemented. There's some cost to implementation, and that's the second friction. We call that effort-based friction. For example, I use one of these boring corporate PCs. I've always thought Apple products look way more interesting, way cooler. They appeal to me a lot more than whatever machine I'm staring at right now. but I just do not understand how you right click on one of those machines. And I'm sure I have the mental ability to figure that out, but it would take me some time, and that time is an inconvenience, and therefore I don't do it. And a huge insight for so many people is that a big reason why people don't perform a lot of good behavior is just because it's inconvenient. And again, we just think we have to sell them on the benefits, but if you really want to create change, you should figure out how to make it easier. Then all ideas produce reactions, and our intention, our hope, is that they spark positive feelings like confidence and optimism, excitement. But very often, even our best ideas nurture, create fear, discontent, anxiety, and that's what we call emotional friction. And some of the most interesting puzzles are there. And then finally, the final dimension of the idea relates to the relationship between the innovator and the audience. And does the audience feel as though this is their idea? Do they feel as though they've freely picked up this idea, or do they feel like the idea has been imposed upon them? And one of the things we know is that when people feel forced to embrace change, their natural reaction is to push back against that change. This is something we call reactance. These are the four frictions. Now, not every idea, these don't inhabit each and every new idea, but what the book is trying to help people do is to diagnose. You're almost like a detective trying to figure out which of these frictions are inhabiting my idea, then starting to think about, well, how can we remove them? And often, how can we transform this friction into actually fuel to create momentum for change?
So I worked in the app industry for almost a decade, and we designed our own apps, but our main thing was marketing other apps. And so I worked with hundreds of different apps. And it is funny, when I was reading through your book, that's all I could think about, because so often we'd be working with a new developer to consult them on how to make this app like really good and one that would actually boost to the top of the charts. And they always just wanted to add another feature and another feature. And it was so interesting because when I first started at the company, I was like, yeah, if it could do this and this and this, I would be sold. But then the more features that it added, the more confusing that it actually was. So it made it more difficult to adopt, to sell, because you didn't know which idea to present. It's like, oh, it does all of this stuff. But like, if it only did one thing, as much as that didn't make sense to me when I started, I was like, well, it only does one thing. Why would anyone want to download this? And then it's like, oh, well, when you go in, you want to know how to sell it. You want to make it as clear as possible of what to do. And then it's easier to start tackling the frictions. And so I'm curious, though, when somebody is trying to create change, when they're innovating and they're creating something, and they maybe come up with the simple idea, okay, let's start simple so it'll be easier to sell. How do you recommend that people go through these different frictions or the different four basic elements of innovation and start to drill down? Well, what is the cost of implementation for people? What is the degree of change? Like, do you just go through one by one and try to think of it? Do you survey people? All of the above? How do you start to tackle each of these frictions? Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. Let's talk about legacy for a minute. We're all working so hard on personal growth and building better lives and creating something meaningful. But how do we protect everything we're building? Look, I know life insurance isn't the sexiest topic, but it might be one of the most loving things you can do for your family. We kept putting it off. It's funny how things never feel like a priority until you need it, which is the total wrong way to approach life insurance. But now that we have kids, there is no way I'm taking a chance that they won't be taken care of if something happens to me. So suddenly, this was our number one priority. And SelectQuote makes it surprisingly simple. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. What makes them different is just how personal it is. Their licensed agents take the time to understand your specific situation so that they can find you the right coverage. We're talking 15 minutes to get exactly what you need. And I love that they actually reward you for all the self-work you're doing. So if you're in good health, you could get same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam needed. And it's way more affordable than you might think. Coverage up to $1 million could cost as little as $20 per month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove. How do you start to tackle each of these frictions?
First, if I may, I love that point. And I think your app story speaks two really important ideas. One is so very often, and this is a story we see time and again, people's effort to elevate ideas, like to use fuel, can often inadvertently create greater friction, right? This is just adding more features. And it's a bit like if you've got the handbrake on in the car and you apply the gas, like it just makes things worse. And then secondly, the idea of this book, of course, is not that we shouldn't strive for continuous improvement and refinement. And if there is indeed something that makes it better, then that's wonderful. But the question we are asking people to consider is, let's not just think about how to add new shiny elements. Let's also take very seriously, what are the things in here that people don't like? What are the things that prevent people from doing the things that they want to do? If we assume for a moment, rather than assume that maybe it lacks appeal, if instead we assume it does have appeal, but there's just something that's getting in the way, let's start wondering what that might be, because that's not a question people think about. And often that unlocks some really important insight. But the tricky thing about friction, it's not always easy to see. And that's because it requires empathy, right? When you think in terms of fuel, you're focused on the idea. Like in your app example, where is the focus? The focus is on the idea. Like, how do we make the product better? With friction, it usually requires understanding the audience. It requires we shift attention from the idea to the audience and to the situation. Sometimes these frictions are on the surface, but very often it might be very clear what the cost of implementation is. But if we don't know our audience, if we don't really understand their needs and concerns, it does become harder to spot frictions. That is part of the challenge. And I think it may also help to explain why we don't naturally think in friction, because frictions are often harder to spot.
One thing that crossed my mind as I was considering the new ideas I want to introduce into the world is I can feel myself also resistant to change. It was funny, just yesterday, I took my husband on my walk, and I call it my walk because I do like 3 loops of this one, like 5,000 step walk every single day. And so I didn't realize how attached I was to it. But then we were using the stroller. It goes up this big hill. It didn't seem safe. Anyways, he convinced me to go to a different route. And I was going down the road, and my husband looked at me and he goes, "Why do you look so uncomfortable?" I'm like, "I'm not used to cutting through this street instead of the other one. I've done this loop hundreds of times. I feel very uncomfortable here." And then I emerged onto this other street. And I was like, it's so beautiful. I'm like, man, with all the work I've done on myself, even I am just oddly resistant to the dumbest changes. Mm-hmm. Why do we stick with what we know? What is it about any sort of change, even though it's happening all the time, that we seem to embrace this illusion of control and still resist something that might be my new favorite walk, which it turned out to be?
It's a great question. And one answer is because there's an evolutionary advantage to it. So imagine you are on a deserted island and you need resources, and you find 2 kinds of fruit trees growing in abundance. And one is clearly bananas. Like maybe they don't look as nice as grocery store bananas, but they are clearly bananas. And there's another fruit tree, and it's a fruit you've never seen before. It's got green, spiky flesh. Maybe you open it up and it's kind of got these orange seeds and it smells like cucumber, something you've never seen before. which one of those are you going to eat? To the survivalist, that is a very easy question to answer. You are going to go with what you know. And that is the feature of familiarity signals to our minds that we have survived encounters with this in the past. This is something that is safe, and we therefore often prefer it. And you see this is not simply a nature of the human mind. So if you look at other primates, there's a phenomena called neophobia, where if you put a new unfamiliar object into like a chimpanzee enclosure, their first reaction is not engagement. The first reaction is caution. The first reaction is anxiety. They fixate on it, but they do so from a distance. And then after a couple of days, this one scary thing is now their favorite new toy. But we do have this wiring that leads us to favor what we know over what we don't know.
Well, so all new ideas do seem to produce some sort of anxiety. But one of the things you say in your book is that the best ideas produce the most anxiety. Why is that?
Great ideas can produce a lot of anxiety for different reasons. And so often the ideas that we would think of as great in the sense of most consequential are going to be sweeping ideas, right? These are not a slight adjustment, but ideas that unlock some new potential. And it's the very nature of great ideas mean that there is tremendous anxiety around them. And this is, I think, a really wonderful moment in time to see how the pandemic has allowed us to, I think everyone could kind of figure out that they didn't enjoy their commute. And there were some real great elements to working from home. You didn't need that direct experience to know that. But the notion of operating outside of the conventional 9 to 5, Monday through Friday routine, it's so unfamiliar to a lot of people. That's such a transformation. The only thing that's really allowed us to realize that transformation is some very radical external force that enabled us to overcome all the natural apprehension. Often one of the ideas we're recommending is when people are pursuing big change, radical change, big transformation, early rule of thumb is never call it transformation. Because if you are selling this as something radically different from what we've known, that naturally inclines people to resist it.
That is something I feel like so many people need to hear. The amount of different courses and whatever that's total transformation, including my very first course I launched was a 30-day mindset transformation. It actually did sell fairly well, but but I ended up rebranding it the next time I launched it because I was like, this isn't specific enough. What is it even transforming? And it doesn't give people a clear picture into what the outcome is. And so say you were selling something like body transformation or a mindset transformation or something that's a new idea, how would you use the main frictions or the steps that you guide people through to find a better way to describe that?
So let me answer that in kind of two ways. First is I would really try to understand. So in the promise of transformation, that sounds like a great thing. Are there negative emotions that go hand in hand with that transformation? And a lot of really clearly great things can, in ways that we don't really appreciate, carry negative emotion. To share a powerful example with this wonderful social entrepreneur by the name of Stacey Alonso. And for a long, long time, she was working at shelters for women who were fleeing domestic abuse. And she kept having this recurring experience where they would call, they would make all the arrangements, they would seem so determined, right? On the phone, she would think, okay, this person isn't wavering, they are definitely coming in. And she would see them pull up to the shelter and they would sit outside, and then many of them would just drive away, or some would walk up to the front door and then they would turn around and get back in their car. And she struggled to understand what that was until one day she realized what they were looking at. They were looking at something very particular when they pulled up to the building, and it was a sign on the building, on the shelter, that said, "No pets allowed." And it gave her this insight that for many of these women, you don't have to explain the benefits to them of leaving this toxic, terrible relationship. But for many of these women, they had pets. And for anyone, a pet is not a light relationship. And particularly for someone who's got toxic relationships in their life, pets take on even greater importance. And so what she realized was, like, I don't need to sell them on, I don't need to tell them about the risks of staying in this bad relationship. I don't need to tell them. What I need to do is understand what's holding them back and remove that. So she created this wonderful, wonderful initiative called Animal House. And what it does is it creates basically animal shelters attached to domestic abuse shelters so that women and their families can visit their pets while they are also attending to their needs. So first, when we're thinking about if you're trying to sell this idea of self-improvement, transformation, I would first ask, are there elements to it that people, on the surface, they like it, but there may be things that are, does it spark anxiety? Does it spark fear? And that's actually a story we've seen again and again. And many companies and many social entrepreneurs that have been really successful at creating change have been able to spot the frictions that other people are missing. There's a great example of why, like, Tinder overtook Match is a good example of that. So that's one thing I would think about. The second part on the messaging would echo what you said, which is what I would want to understand is what connotations does, like, deep transformation carry? And if deep transformation, if what I assume that means, maybe I really think and I could use some transformation, but maybe what I think is implicit in that is 3 hours of my day every day. Compare some total transformation program with what feels like a much smaller 4-hour whatever sort of program. The latter, even though it might be much less lofty in the change it could produce, might be a lot more comfortable for people because it feels like it can be accommodated within their life. And time is one dimension, but also socially too, right? Because, like, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people want to embark on certain wellness initiatives and explorations, but they also have to think about, well, what does my significant other have to say if all of a sudden now I'm going vegan or I'm meditating before bed or I'm doing these things? Those are emotional frictions if they fear they'll face ridicule, etc. I think for me, the ultimate answer is understanding, are there underlying emotions that would hold people back from, I am sure, something that they see is a great idea.
Growing a business is a lot like personal growth. You need the right tools and the right support system. But finding those perfect team members, that can kind of feel like searching for a unicorn, which is why I'm excited about Indeed's approach. Instead of endless searching, they focus on matching. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. It's a matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. And here's what makes it so special. Their technology actually learns what works for you. So the more you use it, the better it gets at finding people who align with your vision. Think of it as your hiring meditation app. It helps you cut through the noise and focus on what matters. You can schedule, screen, and message candidates all in one place. And it works. 93% of employers say Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. And that's why more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide trust Indeed to help them hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. The first thing that came to my mind when you were talking about that is actually a transformation I'm going through. So for some reason, I have been very resistant to give up alcohol completely. And I've done it for different points in my life, but then I always end up convincing myself like, wait, do I really want to be the person that's at a wedding and not drinking at all? Or on the top of a mountain while I'm snowboarding and not being able to have like a nice glass of wine up there with my husband or whatever? But finally, I have a 6-month-old right now, and I've just had this like overwhelming need or desire to really just clean up my bad habits. And I know myself, whereas like I make excuses because I don't get drunk. I don't overdrink really at all, but I will, or I used to like to have a glass or two of wine, like 3, maybe even 4 nights a week sometimes. And I'm just like, I can feel my child normalizing this. I don't want him to have like an issue. And so all of a sudden, I've almost been alcohol for 30 days. I am trying 100 and hopefully a year and hopefully a lifetime. We'll see. But I'm taking up baby steps. Well, it's just so funny because I've been kind of posting about my experience and the amount of people in my family or in my friendship group that's like screenshotting my Instagram. Wait, you're giving up alcohol completely? What about at a wedding? Or what about this time? Or one of my friends sends me a message. She's like, but I have to tell you just how great a glass of red wine is. And part of me is like, do you realize how rude that is? I'm like trying to make some big change. And you're like describing the flavor of a really good glass of red wine, which you know is my kryptonite. Like lay off. But I can feel that pressure from other people. And so for me, I had just done enough of the inner work. But how would you get somebody? I just want to give a lot of examples because I feel like this will help leaders and people out there that are trying to create change. I'm already sold on the no alcohol thing because I just realized that the benefit of changing is bigger. But say I was still like a month earlier and I hadn't realized this yet, how would you bring that to the surface for someone instead of having them come to it on their own? Because I'm the type of person who will dig and I'm like, I want to make a change. I'm writing all this down, but most people won't do that kind of work. So what would you do in that case?
Well, first of all, congratulations to you on what you're doing. Sounds wonderful. And one question I would have is, how important do you think your child was to enabling you to make this change?
A really big part of it, but I'll also say that I've been teetering with the idea for a few years. And so, I mean, obviously I didn't drink while pregnant. I had like a glass of wine here or there, but after I delivered, there's like a lot of people will have a glass of champagne to celebrate. And I remember staring at it and thinking about it and I was like, I don't want that at all. Oh, maybe this is cleaned up. Like maybe I don't have this desire to have a glass. And I didn't for a while, but then I was with my mom and my mom drinks. And so I had a few glasses of wine in a row. And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, I'm back to where I started after almost taking a year off. So this isn't something that I can just reset. So there was a number of factors that were playing it up, but also lately it's like with my bad habits, I poured a glass of wine one day and my baby was just staring at it. And there was something about him staring at the wine over anything else in the room that got me. I'm also doing like phone detoxing right now. And the other day, one of the things that spurred that was I was on my phone and then all of a sudden he reaches his tiny little arm up and he throws my phone down on the ground. I was like, oh, it was like partial shame. Like, has he been trying to get my attention? Does he not like this? It might be my own subconscious, but I feel like my baby is trying to clean up my bad habits too. And so it was a big part of it.
One thing that stands out to me about that is both examples you described are very friction laden, right? Like it wasn't the insight about some health benefit. It wasn't that all of a sudden the lack of alcohol took on some greater benefit. Like what you were experiencing were some frictions around it. And in some way, if before you were experiencing social pressure to drink, you're now experiencing some of the opposite, and that's helping you make different choices, it sounds like to me. But how would you talk to people? This is such a great question. And it brings me to, I think, the most important ideas that I can offer. And it relates to this last friction of reactance, which is the notion that when you push ideas upon them, not only is that ineffective generally, it's often making things worse. It's one thing if people come to something neutral and you're giving them some tips and advice and they may listen to you. But if you were dealing with someone that you were trying to change their behavior, so I think you asked, like, how would you talk to someone who's trying to create this change? My rule of thumb is to follow what I would call self-persuasion. And self-persuasion, I think, is the most powerful and important idea around influence. And it's the notion that humans are most successfully and powerfully influenced not by ideas and arguments that are given to them, but rather by ideas that they generate on their own, by insights they have on their own. This is what makes Socrates so impactful today. Like if you look back at Plato's writings of the Socratic method, like what is Socrates doing? He's using questions that allow people to arrive at this logical conclusion on their own. He's not feeding it to them. And so if I were talking to somebody, and I think some of you may be familiar with this technique, what I would consider, like in the context of drinking, is what you might call guided questioning. This is kind of an extreme version, but if you were trying to get someone to say, enter rehab, which I know is not what we're talking about here, but you could take this and run with it. Often what an addiction counselor will say is something like, so on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning like right now you are 100% ready to give up alcohol for the rest of your life and you've got no concerns about it, you're 100% ready. And 1 is exactly the opposite. You're ready to drink every day and you're 100% fine with that. Like, where are you on that scale? And nobody, whether it's an addiction, whether like I certainly would like to drink less, but I drink more than I'd like to, the same situation you're describing, no one is a 1 or a 10, right? This is an inherently ambivalent circumstance. So what they usually are for an addict is something like a 3. And that's the precise answer the counselor is looking for, because it invites the critical follow-up question, which is, that's interesting. Why aren't you a 1? Now think about what the addict starts to do. The addict starts to self-generate arguments they've experienced of sobriety. My message to people who are trying to get others to change, particularly when they have strong beliefs, so this could be health, this could be in a vaccine context, this could be in so many different contexts, maybe embracing new social change. You cannot force these ideas upon people. I know it's the easy path. You are making it worse. You are making it worse if that's what you do, because you are pushing them farther away. Instead, you have to stop telling and you have to start asking. But there's a really critical step, which is you have to ask from a position of alignment. And by that, I mean, you have to figure out where is the common ground, right? So notice in that addiction example, they didn't say 10 means you're 100% ready. It's like, tell me why you want to be a 10. Well, they won't, because they're not a 10, right? That's starting, like so often we start in misalignment. We start at the point of disagreement, when in reality, if we saw the full context, we'd realize there's lots of shared understanding. So here's like a simple way to use this idea of self-persuasion. If you're going to give a difference of opinion and you're not sure that people are going to be open to your idea, a great first question to ask is, so I have a different view on this. Are you open to my perspective? Or would you like to hear what I have to say? What will people say? Like most normal human beings will say, yes, I'm open to hearing what you have to say. If you get them to tell you they are open to what you have to say, they will indeed be more open to what you have to say. A little final version of this is, don't ask for feedback, ask for advice. Because advice very subtly implies that we are same team. You give advice to someone that you care about, it's a nurturing act. Whereas feedback, we give feedback on Yelp, we give feedback all the time. Feedback doesn't suggest or imply that I identify with this thing. So we have been finding that when they get other people to give them advice, particularly very specific advice, now all of a sudden the idea feels like it's theirs too. And they start caring about it and getting involved in it. It requires a little thinking, but I would begin from a position of what's our shared understanding and how can I get this person to start telling me about the value they see? Because if you're telling them, they're going to shut down.
That is a genius move, that advice versus feedback. I also am reminded of, I used to be a suicide and crisis counselor when I was living in Texas. And I remember going through the training and thinking that a lot of the things I was learning at that time, I was in my early 20s, felt so counterintuitive. It's like you want to go in and be like, well, I've gone through this, and so this is what I would do. And what that actually did, instead of showing them, oh, well, here's a path and this person's going to show me the way because they could do it, it was actually disempowering for them, because what they would hear is, this person went through the same thing and they could handle it and I can't. I'm a failure. I'm not as powerful. Like, it would actually discourage them from doing anything more. And so instead, we'd have to ask them questions to get them to come to their own conclusion without sharing personal experience. And so that might look like, when was the last time that you felt really happy? When was the last time you felt connected with somebody? Oh, it was your sister. Have you called her lately? How did you feel? And like, just different things to get them to remember a previous state of mind, to remind them that it was possible, to ask why that wasn't working anymore. But it was really about, you'd guide them by acquiring information and sort of try to lead them down that route. So I can see how that same thing works. And even in that situation, you're selling them the idea on life. And I think we like to demonize sales a little bit because it's like, oh, another salesperson, that's too salesy. But any big decision, big change that any of us have gone through, whether somebody else sold it to us or the world sold it to us or we sold it to ourselves, it's actually a pretty powerful way to even hack into our own mindsets of like, okay, why is it so hard for me to start walking? We can even use this stuff to reduce our own friction. Like, we can ask ourselves the question like, well, what's standing in my way of this? How can I make it easier?
I couldn't agree more. So whether this is really focused on how does change happen, and whether that's corporate change or marketing or for the self, these are the forces that operate against. And if you're trying to figure out, why am I not operating the way I want? Just be careful about thinking just in terms of fuel, like, I need to motivate myself. I need to reconnect with the why of why I'm doing it. And I need an emotional pep talk. If there isn't a why, if you don't feel compelled, then the idea is inert, right? It's not going to go anywhere. But my guess is, for many of these kinds of really important changes, what is really at the heart of things is that there is something standing in the way. And if you begin to explore that, often you can have some real home run insights into how to start creating those changes.
For sure. And I know a lot of listeners might have heard my past episodes with people like BJ Fogg and James Clear, who are all about habit change. And one of the biggest things is reducing the friction. And one example of this is, I wanted to start drinking more water, but I also wanted to have a clean house. And so I would always be putting my water cups away or like putting them in the dishwasher. Well, what I changed was, I have water cups everywhere and they're always full. My husband will even fill them for me. And I drink so much water now. And so that's just such a small example, but it's like a clear example of reducing friction and how that can work. And so whether you're selling to somebody else or you're selling yourself on a big change that you want to make, I think all of this stuff is just so important to learn. So for listeners that are really resonating with you and they want to dive deeper into this topic, where's the best place they can connect with you or find your book?
The book launches October 5th and is available on every major platform. The easiest way to do it is to go to Amazon and just type in The Human Element, and the book will come up. So the full title is The Human Element: Overcoming the Forces That Await New Ideas. And to remove some friction for all those people out there who each year try and endeavor to purchase holiday gifts for their employees, and always at the last second remember, I failed to do this, and there's a whole lot of work and anxiety about what you're going to do. Allow me to remove some effort and remove some emotional friction. Just go and buy The Human Element for them. It's very easy. Just buy a few copies, distribute it to people, and now there will be fewer frictions during the holiday season for you.
All of the links to this episode will be at mindlove.com/202. So your challenge for this week is to first figure out what it is that you'd like to change. Is this something that you want to change within yourself, a behavior, mindset change? Is it something you want to introduce to somebody else or a team of people? Maybe you're a leader and you want to introduce some big change within your company. Or maybe it's that you have this really great product idea or a course idea. Whatever the change that you want to enact in the world, figure that out first. And instead of figuring out how you can sell somebody on this or sell yourself on this through adding more value, more motivation, ask what is standing in the way. What are the biggest forces of resistance to this change? What are the hardest parts of it to adopt? Why would most people say no, even though there are so many benefits to this big idea? As you go through that one by one, figure out how to release the resistance, quiet the fears that impede the progress. And let me know how it goes. This is a great way to write a sales page. This is a great way to reinforce new positive habits, to break bad habits within yourself. There are so many benefits to this, and this is one of the number one things that you should learn if you're ever getting into marketing. And I always say that sales and marketing is one of the best things to know just as a human or an individual, because the best ways to create change within ourselves is to kind of market to yourself, to sell yourself on a new idea. Or if you're an entrepreneur, whether experienced or a budding entrepreneur, one of the first things you learn to do is to create a sales page. This might look like a one-page website. It might look like an email to people. It might look like an Instagram DM. Well, when you start to write out all of the biggest points of friction or resistance, and you start to write out ways to ease those fears, to make it easier on yourself or other people, first of all, you end up creating a better product or course or service or behavior flow for yourself. So let me know how it goes. And if you want somebody to read over what you've come up with, shoot it to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. If you know someone who's an entrepreneur or has a company or who is trying to create a bigger change in their own life, please share this episode with them or take a screenshot and share it on social media and tag Mindlove Podcast and Mindlove Melissa. Don't forget, by signing up to Mindlove Premium, you get access to all of the backlog of premium episodes. You can do that at mindlove.com/premium. Or to reduce friction, you can sign up right there in the Apple Podcasts app, although I do encourage you to sign up through my website. Either way, though, I just really appreciate your support. Don't forget that all of my sponsors are absolutely amazing. They are all products and services that I love and I actually use myself. And almost all of them I've continued to buy after the sponsorship. So purchasing through one of my sponsors or one of my links is a really great way to support the show if you love it as well. And that is all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with MindLove. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.